Wake up, Portland. It's a wonderful day today.
It was another time, a more innocent place. Portland, Oregon, December 1958.
Dreaming of a white Christmas.
Christmas was in the air with holiday songs on local radio. And inside their Northeast Portland house, the Martin family made plans to collect Christmas boughs and greenery. They got into their 1954 Ford station wagon and left for a Sunday afternoon trip up the gorge. They were never seen or heard from again. It took a few days for anyone to realize the Martins had vanished. Ken and Barbara Martin had 3 beautiful daughters, Barbara 14, Virginia 12, and Sue 10. Each Christmas, Ken dressed as Santa to the delight of the neighborhood children. Worried relatives soon alerted authorities and the search began, with posters offering a reward. The Martin story captivated the city. The front pages of the Oregonian and the Oregon Journal were filled with news about the family. What could have happened? Where were they? How was the search going? But as days turned into weeks, there was frustration among searchers. 5 different police agencies, no one really in charge, no coordinated effort, few clues. Christmas and the New Year came and went. The Martins were still missing.
This is the 50s, and this kind of thing just really didn't happen.
Dan Portwood is a retired detective who worked for the Dalles Police. The Martin mystery is very personal to Dan. He grew up in Portland and was a schoolmate of Sue Martin's at Rose City Park Elementary.
Sue was in the same grade as I was. Virginia was in the same school and a couple of years older. One weekend, she goes home and never see her again.
50 years after the Martins vanished, my investigation takes me to the Dalles Police Department. The Dalles was one of the agencies involved in the original investigation. 50 years later, they're still on the case.
It's an open case of the disappearance of a family of 5, yes.
Dan Portwood and photojournalist Tom Sr. have come with volumes of notes and information on the case. Much of it never made public. And a lot of the information they have comes from this man, a Multnomah County detective named Walter Graven.
He felt that it was a homicide. He felt that it was solvable. This might be a good place to stop for a moment.
Okay. Since this is still a cold case, I will not reveal some of the information they shared, but what you're about to see and hear is sensitive. It comes from Detective Graven's confidential reports and his personal notebook on the Martin case. Once the Martins went missing, Multnomah County Sheriff Detective Walter Graven was on the case. We know the Martins stopped for gas at Cascade Locks. Detectives had found a gas receipt dated December 7th, 1958, mailed back to the Martin home. And a waitress said the Martins had stopped for lunch at a cafe in Hood River. But there was one Martin not missing, 28-year-old Donald. Don was in the Navy and had recently moved to New York, and according to Detective Graven's case file, Donald Martin didn't get along well with his parents. There was something else Graven uncovered. Graven's report states a few years earlier, Don Martin had been fired from his job at Meyer and Frank when he was caught taking merchandise. The thefts were over $2,000. He admitted to the thefts. Graven now considered Donald Martin a possible suspect in his family's disappearance, but why? More on that in a moment. Meanwhile, with little to go on, other investigators had a new theory about the Martin case. My investigation takes me to Cascade Locks. We know the Martins stopped for gas here the day they disappeared, but did they vanish here? One theory surrounds the locks themselves and the possibility Ken Martin accidentally drove into the river. As I walk along the locks, it's hard to imagine Ken Martin could accidentally drive into the locks, but this area has changed in 50 years. In 1958, the riverbank went right up to the edge of the locks. It had now been 2 months since the Martins vanished, but Detective Graven was about to get his first big clue.
So this person who saw the tracks, did he see tracks literally leading right off the water?
That's what it says in the reports. And paint scrapings on a rock right by the water.
We are standing on a rocky bluff in the Dalles above the Columbia River. In February 1959, 2 months after the Martins vanished, tire tracks leading into the river were found in this exact same spot. And on a rock near the edge of the cliff, paint scrapings, matching the Martins' 1954 Ford station wagon. Detective Graven inspected the scene, writing in his report, "There were no return marks to show that this particular vehicle returned and apparently was either pushed or driven off this cliff." Detective Graven was now sure this wasn't an accident.
If it did go off here, I think it reinforces the original theory that the family was killed for some reason and the car pushed off to get rid of the evidence.
But if the Martins were the victims of foul play, who did it and why? Detective Graven was now focusing on two ex-cons. The first, a man named Roy Light, was known in the Dalles. He had recently been living near the aluminum plant not far from the cliff where the tire tracks were found. Because this is a cold case, I won't reveal the name of the other ex-con. He may still be alive. According to Detective Graven's report, Roy Light and the unnamed ex-con were together the evening the Martins disappeared. They disappeared from the Dalles shortly after this, whereabouts unknown. Remember, on the day the Martins vanished, a waitress said the family stopped to eat at a Hood River cafe. Well, the cafe owner knew Roy Light and the other ex-con. When interviewed by Detective Graven, he stated Roy Light and the unnamed ex-con were at cafe when Martins were there. They left at approximately the same time. And there's more. Around the same time the Martins vanished, the ex-cons had abandoned a stolen 1951 Chevrolet near Cascade Locks. A stolen gun was later found not far from the car.
Then it was completely coated with the dried blood from whatever they had clubbed. They had clubbed something to death, apparently.
This is the gun. In 1986, photojournalist Tom Sr. interviewed Bonnie Cox. Her husband is the person who found the gun in some bushes near Cascade Locks, and it was obvious it had been used for something sinister.
But covered with the dried blood, all up and down the barrel. It was dried. And after they decided that it hadn't been, it had been used to kill something.
The gun was turned over to the Hood River Sheriff, but never processed as evidence. The gun was later returned to the man who found it, who repaired the damage to the weapon. The ex-cons were never questioned. And then something unexpected. The serial number on the stolen gun was traced to Myron Frank. It was among the sporting good items Don Martin was accused of stealing. It seemed like a strange coincidence.
The gun seems to be at the center of all of it. It sort of ties all these other little events together.
As far as the possibility of it being a homicide, there are just so many coincidences that point that way.
Foul play. Detective Graven had already come to that conclusion, but his personal notebook reflects frustration. He wrote in his notebook, "Even though I can get no cooperation from anyone, there is no murder that cannot be solved." Meanwhile, Don Martin didn't come back to Oregon until March 1959, 3 months after his family went missing. He came to settle the family estate. That spring, the search for the Martins took another unexpected twist. On May 1st, 1959, almost 5 months after the Martins vanished, a barge was dropping anchor in the Columbia River below the area where the tire tracks were found.
The anchor fouled on something very heavy, and when they pulled the anchor, one of the deckhands had reached down with a pole and struck what he said was definitely metal. At about that time, whatever it was cleared the anchor, and they never actually saw it.
They didn't see it, but crew members reported they hooked something the size of a car. Just 2 days after the barge hooked the metal object, Portland residents woke to blaring headlines in the paper. The body of Sue Martin had been found in the Camas Slough, identified by her dentist through dental records. Then the next day, workers at Bonneville Dam discovered the body of Virginia Martin. Had the barge anchor hooked the Martin car, causing the bodies to surface? We examined the autopsy report on Virginia Martin. It states she died of probable drowning, no evidence of foul play. But we also found a report by a Multnomah County identity technician. Russell Bissett took fingerprints and photographed the body. His report on photograph 6 clearly states, showing head with hole in head. Other than one poor photocopy, we were unable to find the original autopsy photographs. On May 23, 1959, there was a funeral service for Sue and Virginia Martin. Brother Don missed the memorial, claiming in a newspaper article there was a mix-up on the funeral date. But when he did arrive back to Portland, Don Martin sat down face-to-face with Detective Graven. He told him he suspected foul play. I know of no one who would murder my folks or no reason for it, but I don't see how it could have been an accident. We couldn't find any burial records for Sue or Virginia Martin. We did discover their bodies were cremated at Portland's Riverview Abbey, but their remains went unclaimed for 10 years, sitting on a shelf. We were unable to find out any other information. We do know there was a cloud of suspicion that followed Don Martin the rest of his life. According to his children, he told them very little about what happened, gave no details about their grandparents and aunts who went missing that December day 50 years ago. The island of Oahu, Hawaii is 2,500 miles from Portland. This was Don Martin's home until a few years ago when he died. Don raised 4 children. One son who lives here wanted to talk to us and learn more about the disappearance of his grandparents and aunts 50 years ago, something his father didn't share with him. But after agreeing to meet me, he changed his mind. Don Martin's daughter later told us, "It's a chapter in our lives better left closed."
And this is his little notebook.
Gloria Graven goes through an old suitcase filled with her father's obsessions. The detective kept his notes, pictures, and files on the Martin case, hoping for that one clue to unlock the mystery. As a little girl, Gloria remembers her father talking about the case.
Dad assumed that probably Kenneth Martin was shot in the head, and the girls and the mom then probably knocked out, and the car shoved over into the river. It's really deep where this particular spot is.
Time ran out for Walter Graven. He retired his badge in 1966 without solving the Martin case, a mystery that haunted him. In his notebook, he wrote, "Will be solved if I live long enough for the car and bodies to be found." He didn't. Walter Graven died in 1988. Walter Graven wasn't the only detective who worked the Martin case. I arrived at the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office to review their cold case files on the Martins.
It's an FBI report, it looks like. It's from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, D.C.
Based on our story and renewed interest, Multnomah County detectives are now taking another look at this cold case and a new attempt possibly to find the Martins' car.
We're currently considering completing a dive mission to take a look at whether or not that vehicle is in the Columbia River. We have some more advanced technology where we can scan the area subsurface without putting divers in the water.
And the fact is, this case really can't be solved unless the car and the bodies are found. Dan Portwood, Tom Sr., and Police Chief Jay Waterbury are not giving up.
And I'm sure the original detective, Detective Graven, we know he wanted to finish it, but it was way beyond his time, and I'm sure he went to his grave with things that we would like to know, but we never will.
But did Walter Graven know something? Something he kept to himself. On the last pages of his personal notebook, I found this entry. Had to be planned by, the name is X'd out. No one else with motive. Detective Graven had scribbled over the name of his suspect. Why? Only he knows. It's all part of the strange coincidences and connections in this mystery. The family that went for a Sunday drive 50 years ago and never came back.